welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. And we are live. I know it's a little bit late, so thank you all for joining. And I had some topics, kind of a thought that I wanted to work through, and I thought, it'd be more fun to do it together. So here we are. We're here going to talk about my thesis. I have this hypothesis that we've got, it looks like we're moving towards the technocracy. But, of course, they have to, create ways for us to opt into our own tyranny. That seems to be their MO. And so they typically like to do this by giving us kind of a buffet, right? They need to give us different flavors to choose from. And it looks like all flavors seem to lead towards technocracy, but we've got kind of working through left and right. And I say that, I guess, loosely because it's really less about the political structure. In fact, we'll get to that. I'm going to talk about a transpolitical movement that I think is where a lot of this is all going towards. But I think left-right because it's more about operational success, right? So whatever administration, whatever kind of political movement is in charge, they need to operate through or give an alternative for the resistance. So all this to say, I feel like what we're seeing is kind of two very prominent movements that are marching towards, I would argue, a Hegelian synthesis that is the technocracy. But I think we've got Game B, which I have talked about quite a bit before. We'll talk about it more tonight. And we've got the Dark Enlightenment movement, which, I think a lot of people are becoming much more aware of because so many of them surround the Trump administration. So they're very much at the forefront right now. Not everybody's necessarily aware, but they definitely are. And so we'll unpack some of that. And I'm going to dive into also James Lindsay put up an article 2 days ago that really spawned this thought for me. Some of the kind of philosophical underpinnings of leftist movements. And I would argue that although, I phrase it left-right, and again, I said it's really about operational success, not so much about, Republican Democrat per se, which is often how people think of it. But I think that the dialectic does always progress left. And the reason for that is really about collectivism versus individualism. And I think that, if we were to look at it as a spectrum that's left-right, or maybe a horseshoe, that's another theory, I think that we could argue that it's really a battle of the left is always moving further towards collectivism and the right tends to move further towards anarchy. But if you, are familiar with Marx, he actually said that would be the end goal. He was looking for that anarchistic rebellion, which ultimately becomes a breeding ground for usurpation of power and ended up resulting in collectivism anyway. I actually just put out an article on Immanuel Kant, and how he inspired the libertarian movement. I know that might not be super popular, but it happens to be true. And ultimately, while I like the sentiment of libertarianism, ostensibly what it represents, typically what it ends up resulting in is a lot of utopianism that creates a breeding ground for usurpation of power and collectivism. And unfortunately, it often results in a more tyrannical than even what they were trying to resist. And I won't go into too much detail on that. You can read my Substack article. It was actually pretty short for me. So I tend to be very long-winded. So that was a much shorter one. You can go read that. And yeah, if you are in a position to do so, I would greatly appreciate support on my Substack. I think it's $8 a month, which I believe is like the cost of a fast food meal these days, unfortunately. The whole premise behind that was it was supposed to be quick and cheap, but unfortunately, I think the cheap part is definitely, I don't know that it's always so quick either. I'm not so sure about that, but yeah. So for, that price, if you're in a position to do so, I greatly appreciate it. I am really kind of at a crossroads. I'm going to be taking a break in June, trying to figure out how I can keep going, but, we need to pay bills and stuff. So, but the next month is going to be quite packed. So since I'm talking to people who are, pretty loyal fans here, if you have anything you'd like to see me do in the next month, anything, know, that's really pressing for you. Things you'd like me to address, cover, guests you'd like me to bring on, definitely let me know. I probably will be back, but I am going to be taking a little bit of a break, try and figure out how I can get some revenue stream going. So this next month is going to be jam-packed. So all that just to say that. All right, so I guess we can dive on in. I pretty much presented Game B, which, is a social operating system for civilization. They present it as being a new operating system. And I would argue that this is kind of the left collectivist vehicle for technocratic control. Of course, that's not how it's presented. It's presented very utopian, I think. And I actually think a lot of the thinkers in this movement really have very good intentions. I think they really think that they're, creating a new operating system that is completely, radically different than any of the old, and that this will be, a true progress for humanity, and that we will be moving towards something that is, a utopian vision, but unfortunately, utopia means nowhere. So, and even though I will just, I'll just, say that they do say that they're opposed to utopianism, although really that is what it looks like. But I have done so many hours on Game B, so if you're not familiar with it, you can go revisit those. And then I would argue that the ostensible antithesis, right, the dialectical pole, and it's not really right-wing. I really just want to stress that. Both of these are transpolitical. Really, they want to obliterate the current system altogether. Their vision of what utopia looks like is different, but both of them, I think, result in some sort of a technocracy. But then that's the Dark Enlightenment. And I just say it's the right wing because they do tend to be more favoring, it's a hierarchical kind of a structure. It's a, neo-cameralism. It is authoritarian in nature. It's top-down. It is centralized, very patriarchal. And both of them do actually have a romantic vision of the past. But they are very overtly traditionalists, although I don't know what's traditionalist at all about progressive radical accelerationism. But they do seem to have a romantic vision of the Dark Ages, hence Dark Enlightenment, Dark MAGA, all of that. So that's kind of the two poles. And then both of them, I think, converge towards a noosphere type of singularity. Again, their visions for it are completely different. Their pathways are completely different. But I think that's just because, they're going to offer you ice cream, but, not everybody likes chocolate, so they have to have vanilla, and maybe they'll throw in strawberry in there. So it's kind of like the right wing, left wing, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, you get to pick. But ultimately, all the paths are going to converge kind of in the same place, whether, intentionally or otherwise. So the Hegelian Framework, that is my thesis. The core concept of, Game B is this more leftist movement, more of a spiritualist kind of collectivism. Although, if you recall, they did diverge, right? They split because as Jim Rutt said, one group was too woo-woo and the other group was, he more aligned with these hard, rational scientists. But complexity theory is theoretical, right? It's theoretical model. So, either way, both groups are kind of in an idealistic framework. But they did converge, and I still see them as kind of the left half of the Hegelian pole. And they feel that, we're in Game A currently, that we are... Game A is rivalrous. We need to move into a non-rivalrous system. I consider it like the technological age of Aquarius is kind of their vision of what they'd like to see, this collective movement that is cooperative, collaborative, and where we create a collective intelligence, right? That's one of their words, which to me sounds like the noosphere, in Teilhard de Chardin's vision of a, collective world brain. That was H.G. Wells' vision. So we're seeing a through line of various thinkers that are all pointing us towards the singularity. And so the various ways that they would do this is communal. They want a cooperative, communal potential. They want to move out of extractive systems, which they believe game A, which is what we're currently in, are exploitive, extractive, competitive, rivalrous. And so they envision a decentralized, but again, decentralized kind of in the way that H.G. Wells said the world brain would be centralized. So they see it as decentralized through technology, post-capitalist society, where technology such as AI, blockchain enable collective intelligence, ecological balance, and transparency. And, of course, long-term flourishing is their terminology. And they view technology as a tool for scaling cooperation and collaborative nature. The scaling cooperation, transparency, decentralized governance, right? This is Jim Rutt's theory of a liquid democracy, and we're going to get to that a little bit later, which is very similar to like synergistic democracy, which is Barbara Marx Hubbard's concept. And they see it as aligning with society's empathetic and collaborative nature. And their vision is meta-modern, which is kind of just the same thing as post-capitalist, but we'll touch on that a bit later too. Egalitarian society that prioritizes, so egalitarian, more communist kind of a structure, framework that prioritizes meaning. They're always talking about the meaning crisis. And interconnectedness, substantiality, and described as the substantiality. Okay, so then the antithesis is the Dark Enlightenment, which I call the right collectivist movement. Again, not really right-wing, but more aligned with authoritarian, patriarchal in the sense of being top-down. Some of them, like Curtis Yarvin, was even advocating for like a monarchy, a return to that kind of a feudal structure. But of course, they envision doing this with accelerationism, Nick Land's accelerationism, which would be heading us towards the advancement of a technocracy, technocratic society. So this is they argue that Western civilization is in decline, and both of them seem to argue that. They believe that it's because of the Enlightenment's egalitarian ideals. So, they have different reasons for believing that Western civilization is in decline and potentially imminent crisis, and different visions of how to solve it. They want to... They advocate for a return to authoritarian hierarchical systems, and they reject democracy in favor of a elite ruling class, which would be, in their case, they're thinking about GovCorp. So really, it's going to be run by technology. Although, who's running that technology, right? So we still have the technocrats in charge. Their view of technology is that it's a means to enforce order, efficiency, natural hierarchies, empowering an elite to govern, and they believe it's a meritocratic elite, right? That certain people are just more equipped, and they will govern through techno-feudal or corporatist structure, probably a hybrid of the two. And so I think what we will see is a kind of a synthesis of the two. I think we're going to see how. So my feeling on this is that they have this kind of model, right? This kind of techno-fascist model that is China is operating on this model. And I think they would really like to see that be like a worldwide structure. And that's, of course, what we're hearing the Fourth Industrial Revolution is. This is, Klaus Schwab's vision for what he's, this kind of global Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is kind of a globalized technocracy. And I think they've made their efforts very vocal, right? They've been very public about those efforts, but I think they recognize that it's going to be much harder to get the West on board, without being forced. And I don't know, they think that they actually can force it. So I think that they're trying to offer various potentials for us to create it ourselves And so that's what the different flavors are all about. But ultimately, that is where it's going. So you're going to have either, network states that are kind of corporatocracy, corporate fascist kind of network states that are done through the government, right? Where you have it essentially leads to a GovCorp. So I think we're kind of seeing some of that already. This is the Dark Enlightenment philosophy of rage: retire all government employees and privatize things, but they're privatizing it through things like Stargate. So you'll see some sort of, and I think it'll take a while. I don't really see, I know a lot of people are kind of being very alarmist about this. I don't think it's going to be overnight. I think it takes a while, and I actually think there are going to be a lot of opportunities in the meantime. So I'm not all doom and gloom about this, but I think it's important that we think about these concepts and where they're headed. And then obviously the game B type option is also a network state, but it's under the guise of it being more grassroots as opposed to top down. So I think, but ultimately, I think that's where you're going to see it land. So let's go through this article because I thought I actually think he did a great job with it. It's really short. So this is at newsdiscourses.com. He titled it Emergency and the Philosophy of Leftism. And so, again, I believe the dialectic always progresses left, and that is because it's always aiming towards collectivism. And I think for those who come from a biblical framework, I think we can think about this in terms of, also in terms of the dialectic. I think that, God endowed us with this beautiful gift of free will. So he obviously cares about the individual, and free will is a vehicle for the potential of virtue and morality, right? We, through our free will, we make choices, and of course I think he's hoping that we, orient towards the good and, the good, the true, the beautiful, and that we, make those choices that will lend us to morality and virtue. And then you have the other side, which is, and I usually structure this in terms of freedom versus free will, like freedom as an end. But freedom as an end in, most of these philosophical frameworks, or even these other religious frameworks like Gnosticism and, all the little Gnostic umbrellas that I talk about, the mystery cults, it's typically about radical freedom that is an end, and the end is a collective end. It's about the, when you talk about in terms of a Hegelian framework, which, I just wrote about, and I'm going to finish up my book next month. That's the goal. But in terms of Hegelian freedom, it's an end, and it's the notion of unveiling Geist, which is the world spirit, towards the rational absolute. And the rational absolute is the state, right? And the state is God. And this is, this is the collective of people orienting towards this end, and of where he believes, that you'll achieve radical liberation, which is, of course, he believes that humans can have no freedom at all without complete subservience to the state, which is, of course, God. So these are, kind of very polarized viewpoints, but I think that, when you look at it that way, you can see that God cares about the individual and has given us freedom to choose, and I would argue depending on what you believe, but Satan is looking to try and collectivize, eradicate the notion of free will. So this, and it's very deceptive because it's through this concept of freedom. But as I pointed out, freedom is much more oriented to like a Nietzschean will to power, or a Thelemian type of do what thou wilt. It's not a vehicle for morality and virtue. So, but yeah, just wanted to, that's why I say it always orients left. But yeah, so he starts out, let me just go to my notes. And I guess he must have been triggered to do this, inspired to write this when he saw Stelwa. I don't know how to say his name. I think it's Pantayu. But if I'm butchering it, I apologize. And he had a tweet that said, "The philosophy of the left, for the most part, seems to stem from a deep resentment of the past, which makes one's view the present as a condition of emergency that requires the grandest possible oppression as a means for achieving a future utopia." And then he goes on to say that he agrees, but he argues that Marxism is strangely and obviously regressive. In fact, it is impossible to understand Marxism or the philosophy of the left without understanding that it's firstly deeply regressive, though in a dialectical way. Marxism is regressive by progressive means. And this just got me thinking about these, two kind of operating systems, essentially. And they both have a romantic vision of the past, granted different time stamps in the past, different time periods, but they have this romantic vision, and they want to bring that forth into the present, the future, really, but combine it with technology. And so it is this regressive, progressive, and I thought that was interesting. That's what I started to think about. Let me see. I'm just looking through. Are there any questions and whatnot? I can't seem to get this to scroll up. Okay. So then he goes on to say that philosophy of the left is ultimately obsessed with the human state of nature and seeks to return to it, and it works very hard to preserve elements of yesteryear and the present. Sort of. Communism as a system of societal organization describes a return to Eden on man's own terms in open defiance of God, going back to Eden's full regression. However, the paradox of Marxism is that it anticipates accomplishing this full regression through relentlessly marching forward until the circle returns back to the beginning. So kind of snake eating its tail, kind of an image of the Ouroboros. And I think this is really interesting, too, just in light of these two operating systems, because this is really a concept of, immanentizing the eschaton, right? This is, which is what I say that it's the technological immanentization of the eschaton. They want to bring heaven on earth rather than using their free will to, exercise virtue and morality, and in the hopes that they will achieve entrance into heaven, in the afterlife. They're trying to bring it here on earth, and they want to do that through, synthetic means, and terraforming the earth is what it looks like. And so then the next quote that struck me was where he talks about indigenous culture as they view them, and outsider culture have been contaminated by the evils of Western civilization, which makes them noble because in certain ways they're closer to the state of nature that they idealize. For Marxist man, state of nature is genuinely true and communistic, as in communal owning and sharing of it all in relative plenty. And I thought that was really interesting because those of you who have seen like the Game B video or heard any of their quote unquote dialogues, they're always talking about the indigenous people and very much glorifying the indigenous societies. And in the initiation to Game B video, actually, they start off with pre-Game A. This is so before Game A. This is it looks like a very Neoplatonic kind of a society, but it does look like the indigenous people. That's very much what that's like the pre-Game A. So before this terrible evil of the competitive, rivalrous society in which we're currently in. And then, of course, the next one is the Game B, which is it has not been created yet. As they say, this is just the vision of what will be in the non-rivalrous society. So if you want to play the game, and it's supposed to be the infinite game. So that really struck me too, right? There's Tyson Yunkaporta, and he wrote a book on the indigenous people and what we can learn from them. So I thought that was very interesting, the parallels there. And then, yeah. So then he talks about how Marx indicated via the riddle of history construction that they, the communists, are both the alpha and omega of mankind. Alpha man as mankind in the state of nature, and omega man as the ultimate civilized man. Both socialists, but only one is industrial and civilized. And that also really struck me because in the Game B video, they talk about the extractive nature of Game A and how it's so exploitive and extractive. And they say that Game B is not going to be exploitive or extractive. However, they talk about taking technology from Game A for Game B. And that is like most of their premise, right? It's all centered around they're going to use technology to create this collective intelligence. And, I'm obviously not giving you all the details and examples, but I went through that in multiple presentations. But if you remember that's essentially what they're saying. And so that really struck me here, in terms of the parallels that they want, they also call it the integrity of natural man. I don't remember what they say, or they say the authentic nature. I don't remember their exact wording, but they talk about man's natural state, and that was pre-Game A. But they want them to be civilized and industrialized, to have the technology, right? How else are you going to have the network states? You need Starlink or some sort of, advanced technology to create this Omega man who's somehow going to be morally superior because he is more true to his real nature. And so those parallels were interesting. The emergency that Pantaleau referenced for them is that the history has a grand transformative Manichaean telos, but only that leftists understand it. This means that we are constantly delayed from our eschatological gratification in the communist kingdom of mankind as its own God until we espouse the contradictions between our current ways of living in Western civilization and what our true nature is and could be if we just understood it more and better. We just understood more and better. Everyone who doesn't understand and join the project is the source of human suffering and alienation from our true being. And so I think that's kind of the crux of it, right? That it's they need to bring you along, but they're going to try and convince you that it's for your own good. That, of course, this is what is best for all of humanity, is best for the greater good. I thought that part was interesting when he says the communist kingdom of mankind as its own God. And what is on the Game B wiki, where what does Stuart Brand say? That, of course, we are as gods, we might as well get good at it. I don't know if I can find the exact quote, but his original from 1968 was the opening to his New Earth magazine, Whole Earth magazine, and then, of course, in 2015, I believe it was, when he refines it a little bit. But basically saying the same thing, that, we are as gods and we might as well get good at it. So, let's see if I don't know. That's essentially what it said. I'm not finding the exact quote. But so I thought that was a really interesting parallel, and I think he really nailed it. It's really this, it's a very interesting kind of regressive romanticization of, history, and yet progressive at the same time, and wanting to, control, bring us all into this collective vision. And it's also it's very Gnostic. It's all oriented in, this notion that we're trapped, and that somehow we're denied the ability to become our own gods. And so that's the Gnostic vibe that they all seem to share. And I would argue that all of them have elements of that, but just it manifests in different ways, right? In game B, it's that where, some people are, trapped by their circumstance, and it's so unfair. They're being left behind. Oh, here it is, Stuart Brand, 1968. I did get the year right. We are as gods. We might as well get good at it. And then Stuart Brand in 2015, we are gods. We'd better get good at it. So yeah, pretty much the same thing. So essentially that's, the vision is that they're going to become the gods who are going to, be the philosopher kings and rule over us because they know what's best for us. And I think that the Dark Enlightenment technocrats have the same vision, only their vision is much more transhumanist. I do think they're both transhumanist, quite honestly. I just think that the Dark Enlightenment crowd is much more honest about it, much more overt about their transhuman vision. I think that the, Game B proponents tend to be... I don't know if it's truly naive that it's not going to result in some sort of a transhuman vision, fruition, or if it's a truly, they're just being kind of more covert about it. But the, kind of grandmother of a lot of these thinkers would be Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I would argue that she's like the grandmother of transhumanism. She's the one who called Christ transhuman. So I have a hard time thinking that it's completely, but it might be truly just that they're a blind spot. We all do have those, so it's possible. So just to wrap up, the key themes of his article was regressive progressivism, right? So Marxism is framed as a dialectical attempt to return humanity to a communistic state of nature, a primitive collective existence. And we see this very much from the Game B crowd, while retaining the benefits of civilization. And that's, we're going to extract from Game A the technology to make Game B better. This is achieved through progressive means that paradoxically seek to dismantle Western individualism and private property. Marx's theory of alienation is central. Private property allegedly estranges humans from their true social nature, necessitating a return to communal living via revolutionary change. Then, 2, the resentment of history and civilization. The left's focus on preserving indigenous cultures and attacking Western civilization reflects a desire to reject modernity's alienating structures. And Lindsay ties this to Marx's vision of communism as solving the riddle of history. Right, Hegel would say advancing the historicity of man. I think Heidegger would say that as well. By synthesizing the primitive communism with advanced industrial society. And then the Manichaean teleology. So Manichaean is linked to a religious Manichaean struggle where history is a process of humanity becoming its own God. So this is very similar, and I make this point in my book, that this is very similar to Hegel's vision, actually, right? That this is the struggle of humanity, the struggle of Geist, right? The Geist struggle, the Gnostic Jacob's ladder, essentially. Unveil Geist towards the rational absolute, which, of course, Hegel says that rational is no different than speculative, which means mystical. And in the English translation, it says that's what he really means, is that it's so, that's my argument, is that one is, that it's kind of an Aesopian language. It's an operating system that is signaling to, an initiated crowd. So the Manichaean struggle, where history is a process of humanity becoming its own God, and the emergency stems from delays in achieving this eschatological communist utopia, and that justifies oppressive measures against perceived obstacles. So, defenders, So, Manichaean, they tend to do the splitting of the good versus evil, and they see them as two very separate, and they must be synthesized to create transcendence. And we see that theme in a lot of these kind of esoteric traditions. And so it's a very different than a notion of, God creating all, right? They see it as two separate entities as opposed to, as opposed to God, like Genesis, where God created the whole plan. They see it as two competing forces that need to be integrated. The critique of leftist strategy, Lindsay argues that leftist activism serves as the Soviet Koreanization. And the main idea of that was to grow the communist cadre for every nationality. And I'm probably mispronouncing that too, but it's derived from the term native population. That's where the term is derived from, and it's a tactic to destabilize Western civilization and accelerate regression towards an idealized past. So we're seeing a common theme here. And in essence, this is essentially that Marxism is self-contradictory and it's a religious project to destroy and rebuild civilization. So this brings me to my next theme. But yeah, I'm going to take a minute to kind of look through, see if we have any questions. Great chat. Yeah, just like the medical intervention for your own good. That's exactly right. Okay, so the next concept that I think is shared between both of them is this idea of, like a great reset, new world order. We have to tear it down so we can build it back better. And this is the theme of the Phoenix, which, I don't have the book with me, but I couldn't believe it. I found a new book on Tavistock, and it's the centenary of Tavistock. So in 2020, it was the 100 years centennial of Tavistock. And of course, the publisher is Phoenix Publishing. I was like, that's just crazy. So, but yeah, so let's recap. I know I've gone through the themes of the Phoenix before, but we'll do a little bit of a recapping on the theme of the Phoenix symbolism. So the Phoenix is a legendary bird that cyclically regenerates by rising up from its own ashes, and it has been a potent symbol across various occult and esoteric traditions. Yeah, there's the book, Tavistock Century 2020 Vision, Margot Waddell. Yeah, sorry. So cyclically regenerates by rising from its own ashes and has been a potent symbol across various occult and esoteric traditions for millennia. Its imagery and meaning has evolved, weaving through ancient mythologies, mythical philosophies, and spiritual practices throughout history. So I'm working on a Substack article that will go through, tie in a bunch of these themes. It's going to be kind of a series, but I've done a lot of videos talking about these concepts, so I thought it was time that I do, some written explanation. But in this, I talk about the ancient roots and early symbolism of the Phoenix. So the Phoenix's myth has origins in ancient Egypt. It was associated with the Bennu bird, a symbol of rebirth and linked to the sun god Ra. And the Bennu cycle of death and resurrection mirrored the sun's daily journey, making it an emblem of eternal life and cosmic renewal. Then there were the Greek and Roman traditions, where the Phoenix was also similarly connected to the sun, fire, and the cycles of death and rebirth. And the bird's self-immolation and resurrection became metaphors for immortality and triumph of the spirit over the matter. So very much in the, spiritual realm, not in the physical domain. Gnostic and early Christian adaptations, Gnostic texts such as those found in the Nag Hammadi library, integrated the Phoenix into their cosmology as a witness to spiritual judgment and the symbol of the soul's journey through cycles of purification and resurrection. The Phoenix's ability to die and rise again was seen as a sign of spiritual transformation and the consummation of the age. In early Christian writings, the Phoenix became a symbol of Christ's resurrection and the promise of eternal life, further cementing its association with the spiritual renewal and immortality. Kabbalistic and Jewish mystical interpretation. In the Kabbalah, Phoenix is used metaphorically to illustrate the soul's ascent through spiritual trial, echoing themes of death, purification, and rebirth. The Zohar and foundational Kabbalistic text discusses the soul's purification through fire-like ordeal, paralleling the Phoenix mythical cycle as an allegory for spiritual transformation and enlightenment. In Jewish folklore, like stories like the Talmud, they also reference the phoenix as a symbol of obedience, immortality, spiritual reward, further enriching this, esoteric significance. Then we've got Hermeticism, alchemy, and Rosicrucianism. And I would say Rosicrucianism is kind of the most significant one that I think that we're seeing a lot of reference to. In Hermetic and alchemical traditions, the phoenix is central emblem of transformation, representing the alchemical processes of transmutation, turning base matter into spiritual gold. And the bird's cycle of destruction and renewal mirrors the alchemist's journey of dissolving the ego and achieving spiritual rebirth, encapsulated in the maximum solve et coagula, which is just to dissolve and then coagulate. And the phoenix in alchemy also symbolizes the attainment of the philosopher's stone and the completion of the great work, symbolizing the union of opposites and realization of divine consciousness. So I think this alchemical representation is also very significant currently. So Rosicrucian doctrine adopts the phoenix as a symbol of mortality and immortality, teaching that true spiritual ascent requires death. So, right, we have to tear it down, burn it down first, and it's the death of the ego, the rebirth of the enlightened consciousness. The phoenix embodies resurrection, clarity, and the overcoming of material desires to achieve a higher state of being. And I did a little, graph that will be in my article. And it stands as a universal esoteric symbol of transformation, spiritual renewal, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. And so that's pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, so I wanted to just recap on that. And then, of course, we see it as a symbol throughout various very pivotal moments in history. I've gone through Tavistock's Operation Phoenix. This is 1945 to 1947, and this is actually where they rebuilt the entire structure of Tavistock Clinic, which paved the way for what became the Tavistock Institute. And of course, it was the grant from the Rockefeller Foundation that made that possible. But this is where, the clinic was actually really devastated during the Blitz, and so they needed to move and create new building, new infrastructure. And so this was under the psychiatrist Wilfred Bion. Now, Wilfred Bion, he was the one who was working on leaderless groups. He was also very instrumental in creating that War Office selection boards during World War II, when Tavistock was working with the British military, and they were trying to figure out how to create new military leaders. I've pointed this out. I really do think this is tied to that CIA.gov document, The Mice to Rascals. They talk about how it came out of the OSS, and they do mention the British intelligence. But they were creating this. I think this is really what they use to create change agents. But they talk about how they were using this new intelligence test, and they describe it as not quite intelligence. It's really more about mental fortitude and being able to withstand some of these challenges. So essentially, sounds like they're trying to groom for change agent. That's my interpretation of it, and that is what that document really. But they talk about it in terms of military leaders as well, or espionage kind of recruitment. So Wilfred Bion was doing these leaderless groups, and he talked about basic assumption groups versus workplace groups. And workplace groups are what I would argue is a much more ideal group dynamic. This is where you have individuals, they have their own ideas and thoughts, and they come to the table with their own creative vision, and then you find some sort of collaboration between, the individuals. The basic assumption groups is essentially where you create hive mind, and I am being reductionist and oversimplifying, but that is essentially what it becomes. It's they're all operating under these basic assumptions, and so they start to create a collectivist mindset in the group. So that was Wilfred Bion, and this operation, that was Operation Phoenix, which is very instrumental. And then we have the CIA's Operation Phoenix, which was kind of a coercive rebirth, to put it euphemistically. This was the CIA during the Vietnam War, their Operation Phoenix program, 1967 to 1972, where it was designed to dismantle the Viet Cong through interrogation, torture, assassination. It was brutal counterinsurgency tactics that were intentionally, right? The whole slogan was you have to burn down the village to build the village. So they were pretty overt about the Phoenix type of reference, whereas I think Tavistock was more idealistic in there, where, we have to restructure, so we're going to do away with the old to rebuild the new, but it was framed in much more kind of idealist, romanticized vision. And then, of course, we have, and I've done videos on this as well, we have Brett Weinstein's Phoenixing the Republic, and maybe we'll just play, I have 2 clips, they're pretty short, just as a little reminder. This was in his Rescue the Republic speech, and so he has, where he talks about how we need to phoenix the Republic.
In 1787, Ben Franklin was asked if the Constitutional Convention had produced a monarchy or a republic, and Franklin famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." Today, David and the Unity Movement face a similar question. What we must deliver is a republic, if we can phoenix it. I have learned from decades of study of human nature that important concepts emerge independently again and again. And so, in closing, I ask you to think about the job we must do to phoenix our republic.
So it's a republic if we can phoenix it, which kind of implies that we have to tear it down to build it. I don't know. It's a very strange reference, but I don't think that it was, I think that was a very intentional use of the word. I think it was definitely, I don't think it was like an accidental kind of image. But I think it invokes kind of anti-establishment sentiment. I think that's really what he was trying to corral from the audience, and kind of implying that our current system is so corrupt that we need to, burn it down and rebuild and create a rebirth. And I think he was hoping to invoke a more libertarian sensibility in this. Of course, I'm not inside his head. I don't know. But it is very interesting, the terminology to phoenix it. Let's play another clip of him with Jordan Peterson. This is before the event, talking about his vision.
Post-political, non-ideological. Yes, it's technically an event, but it's an event, or we are hoping it is an event in the same way that Woodstock was a music festival. We are hoping actually that this is a moment at which we first see a sea change in the way we conduct ourselves and interact with each other. I think of it actually as hopefully the bookend that closes the era that opened with Woodstock and opens the next era in which we recognize just how much we have.
Okay, so here he's saying that it's not political. And I think that that's what he's implying, that it's transpolitical. So if we recall, he was at those original Stanton meetings with Jim Rudd, where they were envisioning a new political movement. This was the Emancipation Party. And I think this is really where a lot of this is headed, this kind of transpolitical movement. I'm personally kind of concerned about it. Not that I don't think our current system is incredibly corrupt and flawed. I do. But I'm not so sure that this transpolitical movement is going to be a step in a better direction. I think that it is orienting us towards a collectivist movement, and that is my concern with it. And I don't know that that's what he sees it as. He may genuinely think that this is all very decentralized, and it's it is a transpolitical, meaning that it's outside the two-party paradigm, and that may be. But I do think that where it will end up in is kind of this much more collective movement, and we'll get to that. So then we've got. This was very interesting. I saw a tweet from Jim Rutt, who is known as the granddaddy of Game B, and he did a poll, and he was asking if we should, what we should do with our current operating systems. And he wanted to know if we should fix it, which I think that sounds great. If we should burn it down, so aka Phoenix it, or we should build new operating system membranes. And this is a fascinating concept, this new operating system membranes. I would love if we could potentially, depending on what those membranes are, I think that might be a nice idea, very idealistic kind of a premise. But I do think that it's kind of implied that you're going to have to burn it down to build those new roads. I hope I'm wrong, but that's kind of, and fortunately most people opted for, the last one, to build new operating systems. They were not in favor of burning it down, phoenixing it, aka. So yeah, Jim Rutt he's a fascinating character. If you don't know his history, it's worth looking in. Just reading his bio from the Santa Fe Institute, he's been involved in a lot of really interesting. He's obviously a brilliant guy. He was the chairman of the Santa Fe Institute. He met Jordan Hall there. That's how they started to collaborate on this Game B concept. Jordan Hall is also pretty. They're all actually pretty fascinating. And I don't think we'll get to it tonight, but I might need to do a dive. It's going to take some research, but this quality of life operation is. It does look like an operation to me. It's fascinating how many people there are in that organization and how many Game B people there are in it. So he is chairman of the Santa Fe Institute. He was the CEO of Network Solutions. I don't know if his bio is there, but he was like one of the people on the ground floor of doing the venture capital fundraising for what became T-Mobile. He coined the term snail mail. So here's his, and he's been involved in a lot of tech startups. He actually, and this was really interesting too, I think this is kind of what brought him to the Santa Fe Institute, but he was working on like an evolutionary software project. And I think that is why they have, so many evolutionary biologists involved in the original Stanton meetings, which is, of course, Brett Weinstein is an evolutionary biologist. So, yeah, you can read that. Evolutionary artificial intelligence. He was a board member of that. So, very interesting character, and obviously a really smart guy. And I think he is, this is, again, like I feel like I keep having to put in these qualifiers, but I don't think he's like this, Machiavellian kind of character. I just think that his vision is very utopian, and I don't know how it's going to work out in practice. He wants to, build a pragmatic utopian system is kind of how I see it. And I think that's how he sees it. This is the new operating system for civilization, because our current one, Game A, is failing. And so we need a radical overhaul. He does say that it will take a lot of time. He, in his journey to Game B, talks about how the proto-Game Bs are going to be around 2045, which I think is very interesting, because 2045 is when the singularity is predicted. It's when the AI world society. I have to look in to see what Alice Bailey had to say about 2045. She had a lot to say about 2025. So I don't know if that's if there's some sort of occult symbolism there. I don't know. I'm just speculating on that. But yeah, so I think that this is, when I was talking about, this is not, so it's a kind of a counter to the top-down model that we see from the Dark Enlightenment proponents. And then, do I have anything else I wanted to add from this? I'm going to finish up this article hopefully this week and okay. So yes, I have all of these various examples of what a membrane system, new membrane system might look like. Before we do that, I think I'm going to play just this little clip from, it is from Bruce Lipton. And I played this before, but I think it's worth repeating. It bears repeating.
So the first rung of the ladder was the bacterium. Then communities of bacteria came and formed amoebas. And then amoebas came together and 50 trillion of them formed us. And guess what? We maximized in the 500 million years the conscious capability and mental capabilities of our nervous system. And then guess what? We maximize our intelligence. I say, yeah, then what when the human maximizes intelligence? Oh, it comes together in simple communities. Then it comes together in integrated communities. And then when it finally completes the next rung of the ladder, it organizes itself in a multicellular community called humanity. We are on the verge of trying to understand the simple reality of where are we going in our evolution. The answer is this: we are here at the turning point. We're at the turning point whether we decide as humans we want to make the superorganism called humanity, or we just want to let the thing die out because we've reached the end of, and what we need is the awareness and consciousness and the massive intelligence that when you get 7 billion humans to come together in one organism, with that maximum intelligence, there's going to be an emergence of new consciousness, a new awareness of nothing that you can tell me today what's going to happen tomorrow. But I can tell you this: it will not happen until this event happens. And what we're seeing now is the breakdown of the structure, which is inevitably being connected by the global nervous system called the internet, which will hook 7 billion cells together to share their awareness, share their understanding of their superorganism character, and that we're moving into the next state. And it's completely not Darwinian at all. It's the complete opposite, because finally they're beginning to recognize it's the cooperation that drives evolution, not the competition.
Yeah, so there you have it. And it's worth noting, Bruce Lipton is, he's on the board of Qualia. I don't know his exact role, but he's on their about page. He's also an evolutionary leader. Yeah, so I think that those are worth noting. But he says it. He says that the membrane is going to be the internet. And I think that's exactly what we are seeing. And of course, he talks about how we have this option to co-create. He doesn't use that term there, but this is, that Barbara Marx Hubbard terminology of co-creating the superorganism of humanity. We hear the cosmoerotic humanists talk about this, and the cosmoerotic humanists like Daniel Schmachtenberger, co-founder of Qualia, formerly Neurohacker. His brother is actually the CEO. It was James Schmachtenberger who started this company, originally Neurohacker Collective, is what it originally was. And so and of course Zach Stein, inducted into the Club of Rome last year, and Kenneth Wilber. And we're going to get to Kenneth Wilber because he's quite interesting. And so we'll get to him in a bit, his whole theory of integralism. So this is the membranes, and so I thought we would just imagine what, these membranes could possibly be. Interesting. I've lost trust for Bruce Lipton these days. I just listed his connection, so it's really just about your orientation, if those are things you want to see. So build new operating systems for society. What might that mean? Rethinking the interface between individuals and institutions, so more participatory governance, decentralized platforms, things like liquid democracy, synergistic democracy, ranked choice voting, using blockchain, redesigning the economic membrane so the value flows more equitably in their eyes, things like the UBI, which is what the Emancipation Party platform was all about, right? Creating a UBI, universal basic income, universal health care, cooperative crypto economies, creating a new information or communicative membranes that filter misinformation and enhance collective intelligence. So, AI moderated discourse, we hear this from, that was what the Global Digital Compact was all about, right? That was what the UN's Summit for the Future was was working on, creating those documents and enforcing this basically AI governance of, all of our hate speech, if you will. So this could result in some real tyrannical kind of, censorship. But the same could be done for network states, right? It doesn't have to be a top-down, centralized type of entity or infrastructure. Reimagining legal and ethical boundaries in light of emerging technologies, so, smart contracts, essentially. Shaping ecological membranes that integrate human systems more symbiotically with nature. This is biodigital convergence stuff, but of course also regenerative agriculture, circular economy, sacred economics. Charles Eisenstein, right? He was also the campaign manager for RFK. That's his whole concept. He wrote a book on sacred economics. Game B talks about gift economics. Tokenization is something I think we could see under both Dark Enlightenment, Technocracy, as well as Game B. It would look slightly different, but I think both of those would be big proponents of tokenized economy. So I wanted to point out some examples that have already been utilized. There was Taiwan's digital democracy, and this was kind of crazy. It was a crowdsource and engaged in citizens in real time, and it's they talk about it as a new democratic membrane, participatory interface between the citizens and the state. But there was a good enough ancestor that tells the story of Audrey Tang, Taiwan's first digital minister. So it's like a fictional digital minister, and the world's first transgender minister, and how she took Taiwan from an occupation of their national legislature to a beacon of digital democracy. I feel like that's an oxymoron. It's very surreal. It was filmed over 10 days in the lead up to Taiwan's historic 2024 election. The poetic democracy threads together Tang's reflections on her own life, overcoming bullying, a life-threatening heart condition, and gender dysphoria, with the story of Taiwan's evolution from martial law to its most recent election, and against the backdrop of the rising authoritarianism and geopolitical tensions. Good enough ancestor is a timely reminder of the fragility of democracy and the responsibility to tend to it for future generations. And then they have a film that discusses between Audrey Tang and the director Cynthia Wade. So that was very interesting. And then this was all about the radical exchange movement. And that's funded by Glenn Weil and his community experiments with new governments and market mechanisms like quadratic voting and data dignity. Dignity seems to be a really big buzzword, and I think it's like a new buzzword for creating collectivism and censorship. There's a dignity index, and it's basically like to create this like fairness of speech where people all feel safe. It's like safe space speech. But basically it's collectivism and censorship. But under the guise of dignity. That's their new buzzword. Economic value system. So this is donut economics. This is Kate Raworth. And she proposes a model that balances human needs with planetary boundaries, reshaping the economic membrane to be both just and sustainable. Let me actually click on this. Cities like Amsterdam have adopted this model to recruit for recent urban planning. And what on earth is the donut? And I think we saw in the chat the donut said, hi donut. This is spelled differently, but donut economics is spelled like the pastry, DOUGHNUT. It's humanity's 21st century challenge to meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. In other words, to ensure that no one falls short on life's essential. So essentially redistributivism, communism, from food, housing to healthcare and political voice, while ensuring that collectively we do not overshoot our pressure on Earth's life-supporting systems on which we fundamentally depend, such as stable climate, fertile soil, and protective ozone layer. The donut of the social and planetary boundaries is a playfully serious approach to framing that challenge as it acts as a compass for human progress for this century. And this was a graphic on their website from 2017, the donut of social and planetary boundaries. Yeah, so again, this is very similar to like the One Health, right? One Health was the ecological, the planetary health, and the animal health, and of course human health, and this was all about well-being, and it was all holistic. So yes, this is very reminiscent of that to me. Then we've got the Web3 and decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAOs, right? DAOs. And this is projects like Gitcoin, Aragon, Optimism Experiment with programmable governance and incentives. And DAOs are a new operating system for coordination and value exchange, where code is law. And so, yeah, this is an article on it, the Introduction to Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. Let me pull that up. And they talk about what is a DAO. It's a decentralized autonomous organization. They're blockchain-based communities that are designed to bring new, more open, democratic management structure to business. So this is not just a government. It's business and collaborative projects in Web3. So far, DAOs have formed to run several types of organizations, including businesses, nonprofits, investment schemes, and more. DAOs are designed to operate without centralized leadership. So this is, I feel like Wilfred Bion really paved the way for this, right? Of course, he wasn't operating in a technological sphere. He was talking about leaderless groups, but now we have, without centralized leadership in technology. So it's interesting to see all these kind of Tavistock themes, like the socio-technical systems. We're very much seeing that, the cybernetic framework, which wasn't explicitly Tavistock, but it's just interesting to see how those concepts really pave the way for the technological implementation that we're seeing now. The parameters of their decision-making powers and processes are often determined by the smart contracts governing the project in question. And they go on, I won't read it, but I do think that's we should definitely caution against that. It sounds great to have it sounds so neutral and transparent, but once a smart contract is in place and we don't know who is running those and in charge of those, it's going to be very hard to exit that gulag, digital gulag. So DAOs and Web3 governance and participation, and this is consensus.io. Decentralized autonomous organizations embody the spirit of decentralization, self-sovereignty, and community, all crucial to this around Ethereum, which is a crypto coin, cryptocurrency. Consensus enables a wider participation in ecosystem governance through DAO creation and participation. So yeah, I think that's really where they're headed, is that they want to see some sort of programmable currency that will also be tied to governance and really everything, social credit, everything. So then they talk about, what else did I find? I found the Solid Project, which is a project by the inventor of, the Solid Project was to give web individuals ownership over their personal data. And it reframes the digital identity membrane platform owned, user-to-user owned. Let's find this. Okay, they say that it is an open standard structuring for digital identities and application on the web. So I don't know too much about this. I really didn't take too much time to look into this, but it sounds kind of like, digital IDs. Digital twin identification. Like your digital representation online. They say that with this authentication and authorization systems, so digital IDs as well, one can determine which applications can access their data. Entities can grant or revoke access to any slice of data as needed. Consequently, entities can do more with their data because their applications they decide to use can be granted access to a wider and more diverse set of information. And they can share data with others. So they're advertising it as very like peer-to-peer. I'm always kind of cautious of these things, but I honestly don't know enough about this one to make an assessment. Then we have these trust and safety labs, which they give an example of the Integrity Institute. They're organizations that are dedicated to ensuring the safety and security of digital platform products and services, and work by creating and enforcing rules, policies, and technologies to foster a safe and trustworthy environment for users. This includes identifying and addressing harmful content, preventing abuse. So this sounds all like control and censorship. Again, this sounds very much like the Global Digital Compact, just done in the private sector. And so the Integrity Institute is focused on that. Then, of course, we have the regenerative agriculture and bioregionalism. And this is thinkers like Daniel Wall advocate for shifting from the extractive regenerative systems at local ecosystem-informed scales. And these models blur the boundaries between economy, ecology, culture, and they create living membranes. So the Earth System Governance Project, and this is an international network proposing governance models that align with planetary boundaries and climate science. So yes, I can't seem to get that, but I think we have it up on the screen, so you can look at it. It's Earth Systems governance.org. So this is working groups, global environment, change, and governance. So I don't have great feelings about that. The philosophical and systemic frameworks. So the game B would be an example of this. And this is, I don't need to go into that. We know the omni-win system moving out of game A. It's an infinite game. And they talk about collective intelligence, sense-making networks, which, we've gone through this before. I think sense-making is kind of code for consensus. Then we've got metamodernism, and this is a concept I've outlined in previous Game B episodes. But Hans Frenschott, and I'm probably mispronouncing him, is he's a philosopher that embraces complexity and integrated evolution, and he envisions future politics and culture as layered systems, so new social membranes